Hi, I'm Chris Morrison from Elsevier Business Intelligence, and I'm here with Glen Giovannetti from Ernst & Young in the BioBuzz Center. You can follow us on Twitter at @IamBiotech, and we're here to talk about the Beyond Borders report that Ernst & Young put out today. At the meat of this report is the whole nets approach. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what whole nets are and why they would be an improvement on the current R&D paradigm?
Sure, Chris. So first of all, what is a whole net? The acronym HOLN net stands for Holistic Open Learning Network. And as you can tell by the words, it's really an idea or a paradigm that sort of expands on what we're already seeing in the industry in terms of R&D consortia collaboration, looking for ways to share data and insights to make R&D more efficient. So in our report we cite a number of examples. However, I think those examples would be examples probably of open learning networks, and no one has quite got all the way to thinking about this more holistically. And by that I mean not just pooling data of members in a consortia, clinical data, but also looking at things like patient outcome data, whether that's in electronic health records, or eventually that could be in patient social media, those sorts of things. And so, you know, fundamentally we're talking about, could the industry look at different ways of doing R&D more efficiently in what continues to be a capital constrained environment.
Sure, but it's a very much a soup to nuts approach, and you're saying that there are some experiments within industry now, but they either are confined to early stage R&D data sharing, or perhaps standards around clinical trials, or something later, but nothing that runs the whole gamut.
That's right, and I think that's important to say. There are examples at both ends. So there are examples even at the commercial end where companies are looking at alliances. This is mostly in the big pharma sphere, looking at alliances to get access to data that, again, may be helping them make a health outcome claim or help respond to a health technology assessment type of process.
So like what AstraZeneca is doing with IMS, or what Pfizer's doing with Sanofi, they've all got...
Exactly, looking at payer data, for example.
Right.
Now, I think there's a whole nother, and it's really a topic of a different report we wrote, so we won't get into that, but there's a whole opportunity there to think about how you would take a patient-centric approach to care and maybe move beyond just being a product company at the commercial end.
Sure.
Certainly at the R&D end, which is more the focus of the biotech industry, the question there is, yes, we've seen some networks. We've seen companies come together to think about how do they share insights, how do they share what didn't work. But that, to be holistic, to say how might I take market data as well as early R&D data and look for insights that we wouldn't otherwise come up with if everything remained siloed is the difference.
Is there any particular example that you wanted to highlight that is a good start to this kind of approach, or perhaps the most advanced, partially holistic open network that you see?
I don't want to grade anybody because I think all of these efforts are important. We profile two case studies in the report. One is Coalition Against Major Diseases, which really set out to try to tackle some of these challenges in certain neuro diseases initially, neurodegenerative diseases, and really did some of the early blocking and tackling around how do you get data standardization. Somebody made a comment in our session this morning I thought was good. Actually, it was my colleague Gotham Jaggi who said, big data, it only works if all the data can be accessed. Otherwise, it's just lots of pools of small data.
Right.
And so CAMD, Coalition Against Major Disease, has done a lot of work around standardization of data. And what they learned through that process was even things you think would be standard. For example, similar clinical trials with similar endpoints and similar patient populations ended up gathering different data.
Right. Even when done by the same investigators, perhaps.
Yeah, it could be same investigators with different companies. So the discussion of an example that was used of some of the more prolific investigators, you may go into their office and find 6 or 7 different pharmaceutical company or CRO laptops where they're gathering different data sets. So there's some basic blocking and tackling. I mean, CAMD did a lot more than that, but they took on some of that challenge. We've also profiled one that's just getting going, effectively, One Mind for Research, which again is looking at neuro diseases, formed by Patrick Kennedy and others, and with sponsorship of J&J, and now upwards of 30 different companies are involved. So early days, and yeah, yes, not quite all the way holistic, more focused on the R&D end, but important examples.
And what has prevented companies from pursuing these kinds of holistic approaches in the past? And are those same kind of roadblocks still out there today?
Well, I think there's barriers, but maybe even before that, if you step back, there needs to be a push or a pressure to say, why would we collaborate, right? Why is the existing model requiring change?
Some of those pressures now might include companies not being able to develop drugs, payers not wanting to pay for the drugs that companies have developed, biotech companies not being able to get financing. So is it fair to say those pressures have arrived?
In certain areas, they certainly have, right? I mean, they've arrived across that landscape, certainly, and then in particular in certain therapeutic areas where the challenge is very high and companies really need, we're seeing companies retreat from important therapeutic areas because the risk-reward doesn't look good. So yes, I mean, now you've made that mental leap to say, okay, maybe this is something we could do better together. Now there are still barriers. There are still challenges around IP and what is pre-competitive and what becomes competitive. There's barriers not just in the companies about IP, even in academia about what the appropriate protocols are for information sharing. So there's lots of obstacles that will need to be addressed, and I don't think there'll be any one model. In fact, as we were writing this, we tried to say, is there a model we would put forth? And where this line gets drawn in terms of pre-competitive space versus true competition around a molecule, for example, is going to be up to participants in a network.
Got it. Besides the whole nets approach in Beyond Borders, there was quite a lot of data. Was there anything in that data that you found in particular surprising or noteworthy that you wanted to?
Yeah, there were a couple things. A couple encouraging things. So maybe not surprising, but we've been tracking the financial results of the industry for a long time, as if the whole industry was one set of financial statements. And for many, many years, the industry grew the top line at double digit, 10% plus year in, year out. The last few years, that hasn't occurred. We had a return to that. That was nice. But probably the more important bellwether was in R&D expense. So if you looked, and this is the amount of spending companies are investing in research and development in the biotech industry. So if you look at 2009, immediately post-crisis, we went from a situation where 2/3 of companies usually are increasing their R&D spending and 1/3 decreasing, to an exact flip of that. Companies got very conservative in the wake of the crisis, not knowing where the next, the next dollar, if you will, of financing would come from.
Or taking those dollars that would go into R&D and giving them back to their investors to keep them sweet in the meantime.
Well,
share buybacks.
At the mature end of the industry, certainly,
right,
yeah.
Share buybacks and dividends and whatnot to keep people around.
Right, but at the more pre-commercial stage, it was much more of a situation of I'm going to bet my lead horse program and maybe back burner a lot of other things. So, that's not a good bellwether for a future-looking innovative industry to be reducing R&D expenditures. Last year, it got back to 50-50. This year, we saw a return to what I'd call normal. Two-thirds increasing their R&D spending, 1/3 still decreasing.
And you think we'll maintain this normalcy?
I hope so. I mean, the other pressure, of course, is if you look at capital coming into the industry, there were a couple troubling signs there, right? One is, well, overall, the aggregate dollars were enormous because, again, the big commercial companies were able to go out and raise debt and do some of the things you talked about, stock buybacks and dividends and whatnot, and acquisitions. If you kind of carve them out and look at what we call innovation capital, and that's the funding that went to the basically pre-commercial stage companies, that number's flatlined. I mean, the good news is it's stable, or it's been stable the last 3 or 4 years, but it's not increasing. I don't think the industry can expect that we're going to see a return to higher levels of financing. And in fact, I'd say that, and I don't think we're by any means alone in this, venture capital is going to continue to be under pressure. While those numbers have actually stayed stable, as the funding cycles turn over,
then we'll see further shrinkage.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some shrinkage there. So, we're kind of dealing with a pool of capital that the industry will be dealing with, and that's going to continue to put the pressure on the need for efficiency, right?
Well, that's a problem we'll have to solve the next time. Thank you very much for Glen Giovannetti. This is Chris Morrison from the BioBuzz Center. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris.